everybody, thanks for tuning in to Shutter Magazine. I'm Dustin Lucas, and today I'm going to be talking about from edit to export, comparing ON1 RAW and Lightroom. Specifically, I want to get into the shot out of camera to export. I want to look at recovery, whether it's highlights and shadows. I want to look at skin tones, which is all about skin tones, recovering the skin tones, making sure from capture and when we're editing, we're not destroying the skin tones. And at the very end, I want to take an image that's soft in focus, and I want to bring some details out of it and showing each program the pros and cons of each one. So let's jump right in. So as I'm going to show here an image, going into the develop panel, as you can see, no edits have been done to this image. This is shot out of camera. This is specifically with nothing applied. Color looks pretty good. Image looks pretty sharp. Pretty happy with the results here. Going into Lightroom, let's look at the same image. A little bit darker, a little bit duller. Colors aren't as saturated. First impressions are kind of everything here. And so I'm looking at this this image in Lightroom, and it's just dull. Going into Photoshop, looking in a little bit closer, we can zoom in here and look specifically right at our subject. We can see some of this grass here. This is the ON1 RAW image. Image looks pretty sharp. The shadow tones look pretty good. We have some decent details. The blue color, the sky in the background looks really good. Jumping over to our Lightroom file, the image seems, a little bit more dead, a little less saturated. Let's get these overlapped a little bit better here. As we can compare these two images, really start to see the differences between Lightroom here, a little dull, has a little bit darker black tones, but I'm not necessarily convinced that it's a better image. The ON1 RAW, it's doing a little bit of a flattening, but it's a little more attractive in those dark tones versus with the Lightroom zoom. So this is shot out of camera, just showing the difference between how your RAW is being processed, and that's kind of a big tell between these two programs. Just the difference in saturation, color overall. Again, we realize that ON1 RAW, it's applying a camera profile. It's doing a little bit more to the image up front, whereas Lightroom, it's a little bit flatter. What you see is what you get. So jumping back into ON1 RAW, let's look at specifically some recovery. I grabbed an image here that definitely needs some work. As we can see here, the shot looks pretty good overall, but before we get into what I did to it, let's look at this image before. So we see quite a bit. We're bringing back some detail. I'm going to turn on my clipping here, so that way we can see our clipping on and off here. So let's turn that back on. Let's see here. So as you can see, we removed all of the highlights. We brought the clipping in. So this image from shot out of camera directly into our edits looks pretty good. We're brightening up the face, which is usually bringing the exposure almost up a full stop, bringing the details into the roading. We brought some nice clarity and some details into this background here. It was kind of muddy overall. Does a really good job. I think highlight recovery wise and shadow recovery, it's just pretty comparable to specifically to Lightroom. So this is what we're looking at here in Lightroom. So we can kind of toggle the difference between the image here and the image after. Now I would say that these two images are too different overall. Let's grab a specific image that we're looking at. So we're looking at the same thing. Now let's go back. So now we can compare specifically, same image here, here to here. A little more clarity out of the Capture One file, I'm noticing. I don't have any of I have a little bit of structure turned on, but a little bit more sharpness in this image, which is kind of nice. But overall, pretty close between both of these images. Not a whole lot going on. Big tell difference between them is how the hair works with this highlights. Now this is something where ON1 RAW kind of fails a little bit. I like the Lightroom rendering of this blown out area here. On1 Raw just kind of gets a little patchy. It's not as good of a job with those hairs, but that's a small part. It's not going to happen in every image. We're also getting some bluish, looks almost like some chromatic aberration, just some kind of nasty, some of this nastiness here from a little too heavy on the highlight recovery. We can come back on the white point to bring some of that back. Same thing on the On1 file. So overall, the On1 Raw matched pretty well with the Lightroom file, other than that highlight spot in the hair. So so far so good on this image. Moving on to the skin tones. Let's look at a close-up portrait. So something that we're gonna want to pay attention to here is how we're able to recover those skin tones beyond just highlight recovery, shadow recovery, but what are we doing with those skin tones? So jumping into an image where it's close up, and this is one where it was shot rather bright. So we have here a little bit overexposed, pretty cool portrait overall, really sharp, really good portrait of the senior here. And I can jump into Lightroom and let's look at the difference here. And so taking this image in directly into On1 Raw versus Lightroom, quite a bit difference in the in this before shot and how it's taking the image, brightening it up, auto applying those settings. So something to think about. It's definitely brightening and adding a little more saturation to the image, but it is adding this kind of bluish cast to the background. Turning that off, go ahead and get these images a little bit closer in their editing style. Pretty close overall. This image is a little bit, this one's a little bit warmer. These images are pretty close in how they'd be edited. There are some differences that I can't change. You know, the difference between if I turn off my sharpening of my backgrounds, you notice this sort of whites back here go a little more blue. But overall, I'm really happy with the way that this image turned out. Now, I think I was using I do have some details on these, so to sort of compare what we're working with here. Let's go into Lightroom. The difference between my eyes. Let's get these kind of matched up a little bit, so we can just kind of toggle between them. The you know, the difference between On1 Raw here and Lightroom, I kind of like the sharpness and how it's rendering the eyes here a little bit more. In the Lightroom file, there tends to be a little better for skin tones. There's a little more red, which I can work with in on the On1 Raw, but there certainly is a little bit more clarity and a little less redness in the Lightroom file. Kind of like the skin tones and trying to match. Again, this is something where I can add some green back in to reduce some of this redness, and that might fix this issue that we're running into. Has just kind of a little bit of a redness skin tone. You know, overall, the sharpness of the eyelashes versus the eyes, I mean, they're pretty matched overall. I do like the sharpness of the On1 Raw a little bit more than than Lightroom, but again, for recovering those skin tones, they both did a really good job on taking the as shot image, and this kind of already had a little blown out, almost uh, almost 3/4 of a stop brighter overall. So kind of had to darken this image and bring it back down. But overall, the Lightroom and On1 Raw pretty matched with the skin tones here and showing this. You know, there's definitely more in the article and talking about more of the definition and details in the eyes and the skin. So moving on, we want to look at our last image, which is going to be just a huge impact on how you can recover some of those images that you think that are unrecoverable in specifically with sharpness. Now, sharpness is something that you know, you in dealing with soft images. Let's go into here to develop mode. The difference between, you know, an image like this and it's soft to the point to where it almost doesn't seem usable. Same issue in Lightroom. You know, as let's go back out here to grid mode. So it has its flaws for sure in this image. Let's toggle back and forth and get these to overlap a little bit better. Bear with me. Getting these kind of to where we can toggle back and forth and overlap. So here is where we have the on-one raw, and the different settings that I go through, specifically in the article. You have the sharpening options, the unsharp mask, the high pass, and you can see kind of how high pass does not do anything good for this image. It's not really giving us much. The progressive, the difficulty with the progressive is it's just not matching the Lightroom image. And so Lightroom does a really good job. We're starting to get a little bit of noise, digital noise from sharpening so much. We can reduce the noise, but at a certain level, it's due to how kind of over sharp this image is. But you can see in the definition, this has a much better definition than the high pass. The big difference between these is the unsharp mask. And when I go to it, we're still not as sharp, and still doesn't look as good there. But when we take the threshold off and we start, let's go here and go to the default settings. You can see here it just looks disgusting with the default sharp mask. So what we want to do is we want to take the halo down all the way, start building it up to where it doesn't start to get too sharp. It's more in the 1.5 to 2.0 range, and then we could start lifting the amount. But one thing you're going to notice is this image still looks soft. It's because the threshold's on. So we're going to turn the threshold off, and we're going to just sharpen this image to where we can get something that's has a little more definition in those skin tones, and it really lets us. You can drop the halo down a little bit to soften the skin. You can add threshold of 1, which is kind of nice where it brings the images back. But you can see how much definition, specifically in the hairs, it gets kind of dark here in Lightroom. You bring some of that shadow recovery back with the sharpening, which is interesting. To say the least, we also have we can pull the sharpening down on the skin, which gives us a little more flexibility, or just to do it directly on the skin, and we'll find those skin tones and kind of give us the ability to get some sharpening on the face, on the details, and not necessarily on the skin. So quite a lot of options and things, and that sells the on-one raw over Lightroom in those areas. But exporting out this image and seeing what it offers there. So we're going to look at difference between this image is a shot, pretty soft. This is the on-one raw. So we're going to go back and forth. Toggling over them so we can get a little closer. So soft, on-one raw. Now we're into Lightroom. Lightroom does do a good job, but it's just not as clear as, of course, now I moved this, just not as clear as the on-one raw. Not as impressed with the recovery of those details. And especially on an image like this, we have to recover as many of those details as we can. To start from our shot out of camera, pretty soft. Just as if she was in focus the entire time, and just the difference between on-one raw and the definition overall, being able to take a soft image from here to there is just incredible. So those are the results. That's what we're working with. Definitely read the rest of the article. Go into depth in the different areas where it's shot out of camera, the recovery with highlights and shadows, skin tones, fixing the skin tones, saving the skin tones, and then saving an image like this with details and sharpness. A lot of things that on-one raw is outperforming Lightroom on. So definitely tune in. Next month we're going to have another article about on-one, most likely the resizing and working with exporting and things like that. So tune in, reach out with any questions, guys.